All right, folks, back here on the show, and now we've got Matt DeLauro from SEON, SEON. He's been around. He used to work at a place called Microfocus, which was a client of ours a few years ago. So small world, but Matt knows a lot about AI for AML. And if I understand it correctly, Matt, you're viewing yourselves these days as sort of an AI command and control center across different disciplines that really are related and should be correlated. Things like fraud detection, anti-money laundering, know your customer, all these things. You're kind of bringing that all together. Tell us how.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We are an AI command center. We serve about 5,000 customers globally. Those customers send us about every month about a billion different checks to our services to see if a customer is authentic or if a transaction is potentially derivative of a financial crime. And we do operate at the intersection of sort of fraud, data infrastructure, data science, and operational decisioning within fraud and risk and anti-money laundering teams. So think of us as sort of a system of record with a lot of proprietary data that it historically was very difficult for those departments to share with each other. So, fraud is a predicate crime to launder money. You sort of, can't launder money without committing fraud and
Right.
vice versa. If you commit fraud, you have to figure out a way to launder it. So we're trying to bring those teams a lot closer together by giving them a meaningful system of record that they can use.
Yeah, that's very cool. And anti-money laundering might be one of the hardest nuts to crack because it it typically spans a significant period of time, right?
Yeah, it's very difficult for velocity, right? As tier one financial institutions, and then sort of the up and coming like challengers and digital banks offer digital experiences that are very high velocity. Everybody wants to send money in one click or open an account in
Right.
less than a couple of seconds. That's just an open door for a lot of money muling activity that can sit dormant for years before it's used to perpetrate a crime.
Right. Well, and that's the key, right? Is they can sit dormant for years. And if I understand it, a lot of these systems are designed to refresh every year. So if you've got some, little malware or some little bot or something that has penetrated some financial services environment and you let it sit there for over a year, more often than not, they're not going to detect it, right?
Yeah, it's surprising the number of large financial institutions that still rely on batch processing and don't get, real time or even near real time analytics into like the behavior of their customers. They're not re KYCing people that have been dormant for a long time. And, you can think about opening an account with a financial institution and then, selling that account on the dark web for nefarious purposes. So the next
Right.
time somebody logs into it could be weeks, months, or years later, and they're coming from a completely different device, a data center IP using a VPN, and that customer doesn't look like the initial customer. And so we're trying to bring a lot of that signals intelligence, like shifting left into both the authentication experience, the onboarding experience, and the transaction experience so that we can help financial services companies, fintechs, and banks detect that kind of money mule activity early on.
Hmm. How much does device data come into the picture? You mentioned devices, IP addresses, phones, computers. Obviously, you mentioned virtual private networks. How much do you actually store that somewhere? Do you have a profile on people where you're actually storing what John Doe logged in through on this occasion, that occasion? Is that information that someone is actually persisting somewhere?
Yeah, yeah. Our clients, that use our services track over 200 different unique attributes on a device every time somebody authenticates in or opens an account. And that can be everything from, is the phone in developer mode? Is it horizontal on a surface? The biometric information about from the accelerometer, like, is it being
Right.
held the way somebody would normally
Right.
hold it?
That's amazing.
What browser are they using? Like looking at simple things, and we do abstract that into a true device ID that is designed to catch fraudsters and provide recognition. But there's a lot of data that comes off the device, especially as traditional ID documents and national ID numbers and things like that have been exposed in a lot of data breaches. That kind of data is easier to come by, so that forces a lot of our customers to be more reliant on device intelligence.
Hmm. Well, the device is an object. It's got, like you say, an IP address, and so it can be tracked, it can be monitored. That's one of the other things we learned from that other show is, is it stable? Is it moving around? Has it been stable for a significant period of time and yet it's doing things that doesn't sound so good. Sounds like a click farm to me or some kind of bad actor. Just the other day we got a phone call. I took it on my wife's phone and it was ostensibly fraud prevention from Citizens Bank, but it was like a 617 area code. And I'm like, this is interesting. What's going on here? And the guy's like, oh yeah, we're from fraud prevention, and some lady in California was trying to charge. We haven't put them through yet, and all this stuff. I'm like, okay. And I actually called that number from a different phone while I'm talking to this guy, and like I got some weird Google voice will try to locate the customer or something. Huh. Citizens Bank is using Google Voice to route. I'm like, I don't know about this. And this guy's like, oh, yeah, she's in California, and I know you're in Pennsylvania. And so we just need what did he say? He's like, we just need the expiration date on your card in order to move forward and make sure we can block this. I'm like, I don't think so. I think I'm going to go ahead and hang up now. But it was really creepy because he had some of the data, he had some of
Mhm.
the information, and here he's trying to close the loop by pretending to be the fraud department. I'm like, man, what could be done to deal with something like that? I went on the FBI site and went through all these yes, yes, no, blah, blah, blah things, and finally I gave up. But I mean, how commonplace is that these days?
I mean, it happens to almost everybody. You're fortunate that you have conversations like this and your antenna are up for those kinds of things. But if you think, they place 1,000 of those phone calls, they're probably going to be able to execute an account takeover on at least a couple of dozen. So, economically for them, that's a good move, even if, most savvy people are onto it. So I think education is a key part. I don't think financial services companies and certainly some of the smaller fintechs do a good enough job of educating their customers about the types of scams that are out there and what to be on the lookout for.
Yeah, I mean, that's creepy that it's just all over the place. I mean, this fraud stuff is everywhere. I was encouraged to see members from both sides of Congress talking about that fairly recently. It appears that there is finally some significant momentum. Of course, we've always been battling this. It's not a new thing, but I feel like in the last 2, 3 years, especially with generative AI, it's getting much more serious. It's almost like the technologies that you bring at SEON are arriving just in time to fight fire with fire. What do you think?
Yeah, I think quantitatively, there's been a ton of it, and there always will be. I think the quality of it is getting significantly better.
Mm,
So a bad actor on the dark web can get access to hundreds of thousands of social security numbers, driver's licenses, partial credit card bin numbers, and then
wow.
use a large language model to help fill in some of the gaps, right, and identify potential targets. So, it used to be you'd get that funky email about a prince that needs to send you money, and there'd be words
Right.
that are spelt wrong and those kinds of things. And now, like, that's really not happening. So, it is much harder to detect. The quality of these attacks is appreciated significantly with AI.
Yeah. Well, and your service, so you mentioned that these companies are all hitting your service. Is that all by API? Is it basically software as a service you're delivering and people subscribe and then, for one of these transactions come through, they're just ping, 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 they're just pinging you and do they get back a score of some kind or how does that work?
Yeah, the largest customers that we work with typically have large data science teams that have proprietary models related to different steps in the customer journey. So they're consuming all of our device intelligence, all the metadata that we have about emails and phone numbers when they're onboarding customers. Some customers rely on us entirely and are using our scoring principles to be able to make determinations for fraud, and
Right.
that is API first. And then you've got people that are building their own workflows with, Claude and using the MCP framework that we provide.
Yeah, and talk about that real quick. MCP is like the hottest thing since sliced bread. And it's something that sits in between the LLM, for example, and your enterprise systems, which gives a governed way of accessing that information, right?
Yeah, I think what we saw in our annual fraud report is that like almost every company is at some level adopting AI within their workflows for fraud and anti-money laundering and financial crimes. The most technologically savvy are looking at developing their own agentic approaches using tools like Claude and N8N and sort of orchestrating a workflow. And they rely on systems like SEON to be able to have an MCP framework so that they can access that proprietary data that we have and build it into their fraud prevention workflows.
Hmm. It's a fast moving world out there. I mean, it's really impressive. And I'm looking at your report here that says fraud teams are growing because it's a big problem, because it's a very serious issue, and no one wants to get ripped off. I will say the banks are doing a very good job these days, the big ones especially, of offering additional functionality, of being able to very quickly challenge charges that come in and deal with that kind of thing. So we are, I think, moving in the right direction, but the bad guys have a vote, and there are many of them, and they've got lots and lots of money. I mean, we're talking a multi-trillion-dollar enterprise on a global scale every year. But folks, don't touch it. I'll be right back. Podcast bonus segment is coming up next. All right, folks, back here, time for the podcast bonus segment with Matt DeLauro of SEON. That's SEON, talking about AI for AML, fraud, and know your customer. And you made a good point before the interview here, Matt, that it really all is the same thing. I mean, I've seen this movie before with data science teams and data warehouse teams not really talking to each other, which makes exactly zero sense. These
Mhm.
folks need to be talking to each other. I think you're going to see this whole new generation of platforms that are designed to serve as a sort of information portal, pulling from data science, pulling from data warehousing, pulling from CRM. I call it the executive cockpit, meaning there's a marshaling area for insights gleaned from all these different systems. And now, thanks to the LLMs, we have very robust natural language processing. So we can ask questions in English and get answers back in English. And they're getting better and better about citations and avoiding hallucinations, but they still happen. I mean, it is generative by nature. But what do you think about that idea that, and is this reflected in your survey, that AI will be significantly more deployed throughout the enterprise in workflows, and there needs to be some kind of a governance layer or a marshaling area for dealing with that? What do you think?
Yeah, I think the tool capabilities are sort of very far ahead of a lot of the standardization around governance at this point. So what we're seeing is a lot of people building them into workflows where a lot of complexity needs to be managed in things like investigations, but still a human in the loop. So if you have to look at 900 data points about a customer you're onboarding to know if they're going to pass due diligence, that's a lot of data points. That might take a person historically an hour or two to perform that investigation.
Right.
The LLM can summarize the thoughts on those data points and point out some correlations that are very important within a minute or two. So we're seeing the sort of speed and the acceleration of workflows that are aided by that, but there's still a little hesitancy about allowing the decisioning layer to exclude a human from the loop.
Yeah. Well, and you make an excellent point. And then there's this other big fear that, oh, AI is going to take away jobs. y- y- you're seeing some of this in the market. And even though I'm a media guy, I'm very skeptical about a lot of what gets portrayed in the mainstream media, in part because it's consumer media, it's high level. They really don't get into the weeds, and so they don't understand the nuances of this technology versus that technology. But
Yeah.
to me, it's a supercharge. It is an augmentation that you can get. And so the companies that find ways to augment their workers with AI, they're going to do very, very well. But
Mhm.
if you view this as just a way to cut headcount, I think that's a disaster waiting to happen. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it is not a shortcut to like lower OpEx, right? And I think we've seen some companies and some notable examples of companies that have sort of made those mistakes, very recently, thinking, hey, here's this new piece of technology. Can I just replace a bunch of people with it? At the end of the day, I think just like moving from the horse and buggy to the internal combustion engine, like new jobs are being created. I think we're seeing more roles being created in operations teams around deploying and managing and governing agents. And so there will be winners and losers and a skill set shift. But, writ large, I think some of the fear porn around, everybody losing their jobs over the next couple of years is exaggerated, but that's because that's what the media is good at, right?
Right.
The sort of shocking scare headlines. But what we're actually
Right.
seeing is the folks that we work with are still hiring and also deploying AI, right? So they look at it as a route to getting better at reducing losses significantly and being more compliant.
Right. Well, and then let's maybe close off with this little segment of the 80-20 rule. The Pareto principle is everywhere. I'm a big fan of studying it. And really, there's a couple different layers. So there's 80/20, but there's also 80 of 80, which is 64, and 80 of 20, which is 16, and 20 of 20, which is 4%. I think that's how things really do break down. But the
Hmm.
point being, these AI, the LLMs in particular, are not going to get you all the way there. And so you really have to be mindful of that. It's like a very confident intern who doesn't
Hmm.
know everything yet. And so it sounds confident, and you're lured into believing it, but you really do have to verify. And then it becomes a question of, all right, well, how much extra work am I doing if I have to verify everything this thing puts out? Are we getting closer? I mean, we've talked about RAG architectures on the show for a long, long time now. There are countless companies in the data management space. One very cool one, Collate, it sits on top of the Open Metadata Project. There's a company Inside Software. They're the people who do the ODBC and JDBC drivers. So there are very intelligent information architectures that have already existed and are being refined to feed agents trusted, useful information. Because what I'm hearing is RAG is useful, but it's really not mission critical. AI agents might be if you have, this sort of action layer that can be trusted. But where are we in the Pareto principle? Are we up to in the good situations like 96%, or what do you think?
Look, I think the skills that were really important 15 or 20 years ago in systems and operations and IT are even more important today.
Mm,
An LLM is not a cure-all, like especially if you don't have very well-defined processes and you don't have like good hygiene around your data, right? It's the
right,
garbage in, garbage out principle.
right.
You'll just end up opening up the context window to the point where it's not economically feasible, and things aren't going to be successful. So I think those core skill sets around data hygiene, process definition, are things that are a predecessor to a successful agentic strategy.
Yeah, and that's really good news for all the data managers, for all the system admins, for all the operators out there. Just know, as you said, all that stuff is more important now than it ever was,
Mm-hmm.
especially with OpenClaw taking the world by storm. It's like, okay, let's let this little guy go around and do a whole bunch of stuff, give it permission to start bouncing around the network like yowza. I mean, and all kind of crazy stuff is happening. Look at the Anthropic throwdown with the Department of War, and then what happens right after that is Claude goes down. Like what?
Yeah.
Like, what's going on there, guys? Maybe that's the last comment. You need redundancy in these workflows. If you're relying on this model or that model, you can run out of tokens, you can hit rate limits, all kinds of things can happen. You have to be very careful about how you set up those workflows and what your backup plan is, right?
Yeah, it comes down to like process design. Look, software development lifecycle has like a lot of specific roles in it. You have architects and developers and QA testers and DevOps, and like those things need to be reflected in agentic workflows. There's not a
Hmm.
single agent that's going to have a wide enough context window to be great at all of those things. And so I think checks and
Right,
balances are still very important, and
right,
process design, which is sort of the core IT skill set, is more important than ever.
right. Context windows, baby, aka in the human world, attention span. Right? All right,
Fair
folks,
enough.
look this gentleman up online, Matt DeLauro, DELAURO of SEON, SEON. We'll talk to you next SEO and talk to you next time. Bye bye.